Hi everyone, FIDE Master Dennis Monkroussous here, and today we're going to take a look at a very high-level game, an old game, but a very high-level game, and one that I think will help to illustrate a number of important concepts, practical concepts really. So, what to do when you're faced with some kind of powerful novelty, and let's say how to deal with it psychologically, what to do in terms of the game situation. And also, I think this is simply a game that's just very, very interesting, and that will also provide you with quite a few opportunities to solve some fairly intricate tactical problems. So nothing that I think is really unsolvable, but that'll at least put you to the test. Okay, well, let me state who the players are in this game. So white was Paul Keres, great Estonian grandmaster, lived from 1916 to 1975. One of the best players in the world for more than 30 years. Many times very, very close to making it to a world championship competition. In fact, he played in one world championship event in 1948 and came in third there, and was perennially a second place finisher in candidates events. So one of the best players certainly of all time who didn't make it to the world championship level, and also a player who was just liked by everyone as well. So good guy from all accounts. Okay, so he had white in this game. Black was David Bronstein, who was another player who was incredibly close to becoming world champion without actually making it over that final hump. And in fact, he came even closer than Keres did. In 1951, he played Mikhail Botvinnik for the world championship, and their match ended up as a draw, which meant that Botvinnik kept the title. So both are great, great players. Now, this was a training game that occurred in 1946, and as Keres was the older gentleman, it was really a training game for him more than for Bronstein, though, of course, Bronstein undoubtedly benefited from the experience. So they played a couple of training games. Bronstein won this one, Keres won the second one, but this first one is what we're going to look at. And Keres had white. It's played in 1946, as I said, and away we go. Okay, so e4, e5. Knight f3, knight c6, and just like our previous show, we have the open Ruy Lopez. Oh, I wanted to say something else too about this, and to give a couple of little plugs in here. So normally I present my games, or at least let's say games from viewers or occasionally other club players, and generally reserve looking at games by professionals, or let's say the highest level of professional, for the shows that I do with ChessBase. Those are free too, by the way. But I thought that this was just such an interesting show, and it lended itself so well to this format where we can kind of stop the recording for a while and try to figure out what the tactics are and so on, that I decided that it was worth bringing this show, or this type of show, over to you guys. So I hope you like it. Also, while I'm making plugs, I should mention my blog, which I almost always forget to do when I'm recording these. So that's at chessmind.powerblogs.com. So again, free, lots and lots of stuff. I mean, I update it basically daily. I mean, I think other than a few-week period back in 2005, I think, I've basically updated it almost every day for about 3.5, 4 years now. So do check that out, chessmind.powerblogs.com. Okay, so back to our game. Ads are over. We go to the main position of the open Ruy Lopez. So this is kind of the fundamental, basic starting position where white really gets to decide what's going to happen, what the character of the play is going to be. So, as I think I probably mentioned last week, white has a bunch of moves here. There's c3, which I believe is the move that was chosen in the game we looked at last time. There's knight b to d2, trying to evict this powerful knight right away. There's bishop to e3. So this is kind of a prophylactic move against the bishop to c5 approach that black will sometimes choose. And I think that's everything except for the move that was played in the game, which is queen to e2. And this move, I'm sure Keres didn't invent it. I'm sure that people played it before he did. But the system which underlies it is one that is named for him. So the basic idea of queen to e2 is to prepare rook to d1, and then c4, trying to exert immediate pressure on black's center. So most of the approaches that white takes with c3 or bishop b3 or knight b to d2 are piece play approaches, and often or one of the major goals behind it, that way of playing, is to fight for some dark squares, especially d4. So that's, let me get rid of all of this. It's not relevant here, but in this rook to d1 c4 system, but in most of the lines after bishop to e6, white tries to fight for the d4 square and the dark squares in general, so c5 too. So you can see bishop to e3 does that. c3 followed by bishop c2, knight to d2, and the knight to b3 does that. And knight b to d2 can do it as well, though that's going to be in conjunction with a later c3, bishop c2, and so on. All right, well, this queen to e2 approach just bypasses all of this nice finesse business and strives to undermine black's whole construction in the center. So it's a very ambitious approach. Okay, and note, of course, that bishop to c5 doesn't really do anything here because bishop to e3, I mean, this is an exchange that white is perfectly happy to make. His dark squared bishop, white's that is a bad bishop because the e5 pawn is a central pawn and it kind of locks down on its potential, while the black bishop on c5 is a very good bishop. So white is happy to make this exchange, and so bishop to c5 is kind of walking into it. So that's no real burden for white there. Okay, so queen e2, bishop to e7 is the standard move. And now the typical way that this variation proceeds is like this. Rook to d1, black castles, white plays c4, so the thematic idea, takes, and now, kind of ironically, it might seem, black plays bishop to c5 here. Okay, well, why would black do that? I mean, for a couple of reasons it seems mysterious. One is that we just pointed out that all things being equal, white is happy to make this exchange. And secondly, it's not really clear at first glance what black has gained after this exchange. But the answer is just this, that because white's queen is now on e3 rather than on e2, black has queen to b8. So that little tactical finesse enables him to break the pin. So now bishop takes d5 is no big deal at all because of queen takes b2. And after bishop to b3, knight a5, black is more or less okay. I mean, this is still an important variation. Knight b to d2, and the play continues from here. Certainly white can still fight for an advantage. Objectively, I think black should equalize, and I think that's pretty well the current consensus in Grandmaster play. But still, in club play, first of all, black has to figure out how to get here and how the play should continue from this point. And secondly, even if they know, I think that there's still enough play in the position, certainly for mere mortals like us, to continue the action. The game won't result in some kind of quick draw, as long as either player wants to continue fighting. But objectively speaking, black is in pretty good shape there. Is equal or very close to equal. Okay. Now, as I said, that's the main line, but Keres tried something very unusual. So he had this little gambit prepared with the immediate c4. Okay, now let's say you face a move like this and you've never seen it before, but you know that the main line is rook to d1, castle, c4, etc. Okay, so when you see c4, what do? Well, after, let's say, maybe a few seconds of recrimination for not having looked it up at some point and wondering if maybe you did something wrong, the attitude that you should take is, okay, I know this position before c4 is a perfectly normal one and black is okay. So I would cultivate the attitude, I mean, unless you're playing Ribka or something, or some super grandmaster, and even then, really, the attitude you should cultivate is, okay, this is a really well-known position, and if it isn't the main line, and if whatever books I studied didn't bother to mention c4, then there must be something wrong with it. I haven't done anything wrong yet in the game, so there's got to be some really good response to this c4 advance. And then I would take quite a bit of time. I would take as much time as I felt I needed to come up with something that looked ultimately attractive to me. So rather than panicking and acquiescing in some position that's favorable for white, I would really do the very best that I could and take, okay, I mean, can't take the whole time, you don't want to lose on time, but I would take a pretty substantial length of time if I needed, or as much as I needed pretty much, to figure out what to do. And two reasons for this. So one is just a fundamental confidence in my position. If I haven't done anything wrong, there must simply be something good, period. And secondly, because if something like this isn't good, then the time I spend will pay off, because I'm going to end up with a great position. So all I have to do is really solve what's going on here. And then, okay, maybe I'm not just going to win, but I'm going to have a very nice advantage at the least. I'll have a very good game. So what I would suggest is stop the recording here and start calculating. Okay, what should black do? This pawn can be taken a couple of different ways. Both of those captures certainly ought to be examined. And okay, maybe there's something else too, but just do what you can to figure out what it is that black ought to do. And I would say take even 20-30 minutes to try to do it. So I'm not going to wait for 30 minutes, but I'll encourage you to stop the recording and to think for quite a while. Okay, well, as I said, the two most natural moves are the captures, and we should look at both of them. So let's start with d takes c4. This is fairly interesting. Okay, now here white has any number of approaches that he can try. One way to proceed is with rook to d1. So let's just start with this move. So we attack the queen. We're going to try to drive it away. Actually, no, I'm sorry. Let me say one thing first. Okay, so queen takes e4 is the most obvious move here, taking the piece and threatening the knight on c6. Okay, well, black only has one move to stay afloat here, and that's bishop to d5. So that's why I was suggesting we take a look quickly at rook to d1. So the idea being we're going to kick the queen away, and then we can play queen takes on e4. Okay, well, black can try a number of things here that are unsuccessful. Could try queen takes d1 with the idea that if queen takes d1, we take the bishop. Unfortunately, white simply recaptures with the bishop, and then he's up a queen for a rook and a pawn, and it's just not going to be enough. So queen takes d1 is bad. Okay, if queen to c8, well, queen takes e4, white has won the piece, has gotten what he wanted, and because of the threat of queen takes c6 and the unavailability of an intelligent bishop to d5 here, again, white's winning. Okay, third try is bishop to d5, and this is probably okay, or at least it seems okay at first glance, but let's look deeper. Bishop to c2, all right, so we're hitting the knight. It's got to retreat. Knight to c3. Okay, the bishop's endangered, so knight to b4 looks pretty natural. Knight takes d5. Knight takes d5. So it looks as if black is actually in quite good shape here. He's up a pawn. He's kept his piece. Bishop to e4 doesn't do anything because black can take and then play c6, or play c6 right away. So is black off the hook here? Another quick little tactical puzzle for you. And the answer seems to be that he's not, because of knight to d4. So this is in fact a very strong move, threatening knight to c6, and white has a big and probably winning advantage here. Okay, knight f5 is also a very annoying threat. So let's say g6, knight c6, queen d7, takes, king takes, and now something like b3 is really very strong, and white's probably just winning here. So he's threatening to take on c4 twice. There's also possibilities like bishop to a3 at some point, and black is just getting so incredibly, white's getting so incredibly active here. The two bishops are going to absolutely run roughshod over the knights. Black's king is stuck in the center, so white has a winning advantage here. Okay. Where are we? So the last line, okay, so we were, let me see, oh, let's go back like this. Okay, yeah, so rook to d1. And so then here the last thing to try, and this I think is actually playable, is c takes b3. And, okay, rook takes d8, rook takes d8. And now some interesting possibilities here. Okay, if queen takes e4, rook to d1 check, knight e1, rook takes c1, and okay, this position looks to be pretty good for black. It's at least playable, certainly. White has to be extremely careful here. So, for example, knight to d2, rook a1, queen c6, king d8, queen a8 check, king d7, let's say, queen h8, rook e1, knight f1, and then here practically everything wins. So bishop to c4 is winning, b takes a2 is winning. So white's toast here. Now, of course, white can do better than this. So here, instead of queen takes e4, you could play, let's say, a3, or maybe a takes b3 is okay. But black certainly has this compensation here, to be sure. Another idea is a4. But in any case, in all of these variations, black is fundamentally all right. So rook to d1 is pretty good, but it's not quite killing. Okay, so we looked at queen takes e4. We're going to look at that more. Looked at rook to d1. Okay, another possibility is bishop takes c4, and then after bishop c4 to play queen e4. Now the idea is, of course, if bishop takes f1, then queen c6 check is quite good for white. And the black can play bishop to d5. This is it's okay, but after queen to g4, white should be in good shape. But the best is just queen to d5, and here it looks like black is simply better, because white now can't really avoid the exchange of queens because of bishop takes f1. And when he does exchange queens, black's bishop pair is really quite strong. There's also a problem for white that his e5 pawn is pretty weak. So bishop takes f3 followed by knight e5 is a threat. Also maybe bishop takes f3 followed by knight to d4 is a threat. So this is really a very pleasant position for black. Okay, so what's left? Bishop c2 is another idea. Oh no, I'm sorry, we looked at this already. Yeah, this actually worked out well. So yeah, this looks like a bit of a problem for black. Also, even queen takes e4 is strong. So we looked at bishop to d5, but we didn't continue. So for example, queen to g4, bishop takes f3, queen takes f3. Queen g7 is not really so clear. After queen f3, knight to d4, queen g4, cb, queen g7. Okay, so we can see this is a very, very murky position. But it looks like one that ultimately is probably a little bit better for white. So both this variation and the bishop to c2 line looked like they're good for white. So going back to this position here after c4, it seems that dc isn't really the solution to all of black's problems. So let's look at the second capture with b takes c4. Okay, so now white could play bishop takes c4, but okay, takes, and now either bishop to d5 or queen to d5 is at least equal for black. Now this might seem surprising because of the doubled pawns, and in fact not only are they doubled, but all of black's queenside pawns are isolated as well. But black's bishop pair is in fact more important. He's also got a lead in development, and the pawn on c4 is actually quite useful because it fixes this b2 pawn as a backward pawn on an open file. So black is actually in very good shape here. Okay, so in fact this is what happened in the game, but we'll see, we'll get to the critical moment later. So b takes c4, Keres played bishop to a4. Alright, now if queen to d7, knight to d4 is just winning because after knight takes d4, bishop d7 comes with check. Now maybe black has some play. I mean, he's got these beautiful knights, he's got the bishop pair, and he's got a pawn in addition to the two pieces. But ultimately, this should be better. Maybe not winning yet for white, but white, I would think, ought to have a genuine advantage here. So probably white needs to play queen to d1 here to keep black from playing something like bishop to a4 and knight c2. But okay, after queen to d1, again, there's play, but I don't know that it's enough. All right, could be interesting, but black can do much better than this. So the only other possibility really besides queen to d7 is bishop to d7. I mean, king to d7 makes no sense because of knight to d4. So bishop to d7. And now white could play knight to c3. This will be somewhat like the game actually, so we'll skip this. E6. So this is the big idea. E6, fe6. Okay, and now white has a choice between knight to c3 and bishop takes c6. So if knight c3, knight c5, not forced, takes, knight e5. Well, this again will be like the game, so I prefer to just kind of bypass this for the moment. Okay, so bishop takes c6, bishop takes c6, knight e5. Now, I hope you reached this point when you were calculating c4. So it's only 4 moves later. It's not really that far in. And this is really what Keres' big idea was. He's down 2 pawns and doesn't have that much development, but okay, neither does black really. They both have 3 developmental, or 3, let's say, development elements. Black has the knight and both bishops out. White has the knight and the queen out and is castled. So they're roughly equal there. Of course, black has this big presence in the center, but he's faced with the threat of knight takes c6 and the threat of queen to h5 check. So this was the idea that white had in mind with this pawn sacrifice, or this double pawn sacrifice, really. So I hope you reached this position, and I hope further, of course, if you did reach this position, that you had some idea of what black to move ought to do here. So if you didn't, well, let me again invite you to stop the recording here and to try to figure out what black should do. Okay, well, black, of course, has the 2 threats to address, the threat to the bishop and the threat of queen h5 check. And it does seem clear that letting white play knight takes c6 for free is not acceptable. So that might give rise to the thought of, well, maybe queen to d6 lets the black king escape. But queen h5 check, and the king can't really move because king f8 allows queen f7 mate, and king d8 allows the knight to go to f7, winning the queen. So black could play g6, but it's not clear that black is in better shape with queen to d6 than he would be with bishop to b7. So that's in fact what Bronstein played, bishop to b7. Okay, white's got nothing left here but queen to h5 check. Black has to play g6, knight takes g6. And now black has a choice between 2 moves, both of which are actually pretty good. And in fact, they were both played, they were played in 2 different games. So one move was played in our game, the other move was played in a much more recent game, and black won on both occasions in pretty convincing fashion. Okay, so the more recent game was played between L. Schneider and Leon Pleister. Pleister, both are IMs, or Schneider at least was an IM at that point. It's played in Copenhagen in 1982. Pleister was not an IM at that point, but he became one. And speaking of ads, not for me, but for Pleister, he wrote a very good book in the mid-90s on the 4E3 systems in the Nimzo-Indian defense. So if you can find that book, I mean, if you play the Nimzo-Indian with either side, I would highly recommend it. I mean, it's a little bit old, but I still think it's an excellent book with a lot of very good information and some excellent thematic games that I believe will help you learn to play either side of that set of opening systems. Okay, well, anyways, let's take a look at how that game went. So Pleister played h takes g6, just giving up the rook. Queen h8, king d7. Now, white's up the exchange, but for only a pawn. Black has the bishop pair, and he has this ridiculously mighty mass of pawns in the center. And they're all just going to advance and keep crawling forward. And I think that if white were to trade queens, the resulting endgame would be close to lost. Maybe not altogether there, but very close. So white decided to play queen h8, trying to keep his attacking hopes alive. Pleister played queen h8, queen takes g6. Here I think the immediate rook to g8 would be the best move, but Pleister played d4, which, okay, not best, but it's not a horrible move by any stretch. f3, rook to g8, queen h6. And now, very nice tactical idea here from Pleister. So see, what would you play here with black? What looks like a nice cure? Well, it's not a cure. Black has no problems here. And if anything, it's going to be white who's poisoned by the game continuation. So what should black do here? It's very, very attractive. The answer is he plays d3, which is a very nice idea. Okay, what's the point of this? Well, f takes e4 is the move in the game. If queen takes h8, then bishop to c5 check, king h1, knight to g3 check, gh, and then rook takes h8 with mate next move. So very nice little combination there. F takes e4 is the move played in the game, and now we'll again see some very nice attacking ideas. Queen to d4 check. Okay, if king to h1 or bishop to e3, then queen takes e4 is just crushing. So we've got a triple attack on g2, and white's unable to adequately defend it. So if queen to h3, for instance, rook takes g2 is decisive. If rook to f3, then okay, two easy ways to win. Of course, queen to e1 check is just mate next move, but you could also play queen takes f3, which, okay, it's mate in 2 because white can play queen takes e6 check and waste a move, but that's also a mate. So, after queen to d4 check, white pretty much has to play queen to e3. So that way on queen takes e4, he can play queen takes e4 and adequately protect the g2 point. Okay, but the fun isn't over yet. Black follows up with the very nice bishop to c5. Okay, so now if queen d4, bishop takes d4, king h1, bishop e4, and white's lost. Really, he has to play rook to g1 here, but still after bishop takes g1, king g1, rook g2, king f1, black is winning here. Just all of the pawns being so far advanced is going to prove deadly for white. Okay, still that would be better than rook to f3 because bishop f3, gf, and then rook to g1 is mating. Okay, so queen takes d4 in this position is unsatisfactory, but nothing else is really so great either. White tried rook f7 check and then rook to f2, but he still got pasted here with queen to e5, queen e1, bishop takes f2. Okay, again, if queen takes f2, then queen takes e4 is winning because, again, he can't. White can't adequately protect the g2 pawn, and if he plays g3, whoops, he plays the pawn at g3, then queen h1 is mate. So he played king takes f2 here, bishop e4, threatening rook takes g2, g3, rook f8, now rook f3, threatening queen to d4 check. So bishop to e3. Okay, and now, once again, how does black continue the attack here? So it looks as if he might even escape. He's up a piece for a pawn. What does he do? Or what does black do about this? Well, the answer is that he needs to utilize the long diagonal, and the bishop is in the way of the queen. So he plays bishop to c6. Good move. And it's important that he gets to do it with tempo because of the hit here. If it wasn't hitting this bishop, white would play knight to c3 and would be okay. But now, after bishop f2, queen to d5, white is helpless against threats like rook to e3 and rook takes g3 check. And in fact, the game ends, knight c3, rook g3, and with mate next move, white gave up. Okay, so that was the Schneider-Pleister game, and that occurred with knight takes g6, h takes g6. Okay, Bronstein played something a little bit different, but just as good, maybe even a touch better, but they're both completely fine. So he played knight f6. And this is actually a very useful trick to know, because there are quite a few variations in chess opening theory, where white has this queen h5, knight takes g6 idea, where black queen h4, knight takes g3. So by playing knight to f6, it gives black the freedom to move the rook next move, because, well, here you can't move the rook. So here, Something like rook to g8 would just be a blunder because of knight e5 with queen f7 mate in the offing. Of course, black can play rook to g6, but still get the point. You're not saving any material. Whereas with knight f6, with the queen having to retreat now, the rook can move to g8 in safety. Okay, so Keres played queen h3, rook to g8. White could play knight e7, but after queen e7, black's just up a pawn with a better position. So knight to e5. And, okay, black is still up a pawn, but his king is still stuck in the center. The e6 pawn is under attack, and it doesn't look quite hopeless for white yet. So see if you can figure out what the best move is for black. By the way, I would say that this would be a reasonable place maybe after rook to g8. So ideally, I think, if you're calculating c4 back on move 10, I think this would be a good stopping point in your calculation. So just by way of self-assessment, I think if you'd reached this, or if you had looked at the h takes g6 line from the Pleister game and had evaluated that successfully, then I would consider that to have been a successful example of good calculation. Okay, I'm not saying it's easy, it's just in terms of an idea what it is that you should have shot for, or could consider, let's say, a fully satisfactory solution of the problem. Okay, so back to knight e5. Bronstein found a very elegant and powerful way of handling this position. So he played d4. Now, this does two things. So first of all, it comes with, well, it actually does more than two things. It does at least three things. So one is it has this threat of rook takes g2, which is both useful in its own right and inducing some kind of weakness, and enables the d4 move to occur with tempo. So that's one thing that we get, or maybe two, if we say the tempo and the induced weakness. Okay, second point is that we take away c3 from white's knight. So that piece is not going to get to develop naturally. In fact, bishop to e3 is also ruled out as well. So we've impeded the development of white's minor pieces with d4. A third point, and this is big, we're preparing the very powerful and just aesthetically satisfying queen of d5, which piles up on g2, protects the pawn on c4, protects the pawn on e6, and kicks the knight on e5. So this d4 move is really very strong, and here I think we can say with a high degree of confidence that black has a very serious advantage. White played f3. He had to stop the threat somehow, and this is a better way to try to blunt the threat and to shut down this bishop on b7 than playing something like g3 would be. Okay, queen of d5, bishop to f4, and here black has any number of good continuations. He could castle long. This should be just perfectly good. He could play d3, grabbing some more space and threatening queen of d4 check, though on the other hand it gives up the c3 square to the knight, so it's maybe a little bit less attractive. But Bronstein found a really ingenious move here, a very surprising move. It has a certain logic to it, certainly, but it still is kind of surprising. He played knight to d7. Now this looks odd because it seems to, well, it does a few things that are odd. One is that it maneuvers, it doesn't bring out a piece, so it's moving a piece again. It leaves the king in the center. It seems to deactivate the knight, and it hangs the h7 pawn. So what in the world is Bronstein up to with this move? Well, basically what he's up to is eliminating this knight on e5. I mean, that's really the whole point of this, is that this knight on e5 is a good piece for white. In fact, it's really white's only very good piece. So by getting rid of it, he's getting rid of almost all of white's counterplay. He would also like to maybe take over the e5 square for himself and be able to play e5, and perhaps there's some other ideas as well that we'll see later, so I don't want to ruin those by foreshadowing them. Okay, well, of course white doesn't want to play knight takes d7, because after king takes d7, this rook is ready to come into the game. So you can play rook to g6 and double, or maybe play the rook to f8, and all is well, and he can always castle artificially. Okay, well, how about queen takes h7? Well, here black should play this. He should simply castle long. And now white has a couple of possibilities. So there's knight takes c4, trying to actually go a pawn up here, and then after queen c4, after queen to c4, to play queen takes e7. So that's one idea. The second idea is, of course, just to take on e7 straight away. So let's take a look at this. So queen e7, knight e5, and here white has a difficult position. Okay, now he can play something like knight to d2 or bishop to g3, and then material is even, but with his dominating position in the center, black has a serious advantage. But I want to show some neat tactics that are illustrated not by a possible game continuation, but just to show what black's threat is here. So the first question is this: is black threatening to play knight takes f3 check or not? So take a few moments and try to determine whether that really is a threat or not. So it's actually proves quite interesting. Okay, well, I hope I'm giving all of you a very good tactical workout here. And let's see if knight takes f3 really is a threat or not. So knight takes f3. Now, of course, if white doesn't take the knight, then there's no problem. The knight can just go back to e5, or he can play e5. But because of this threat of queen takes c7 mate, it might seem like there is no threat of knight takes f3. That rook takes f3 is fine because queen f3, queen c7's mate. Okay, so that's the most basic idea. But the position is actually much more interesting because black has this trick, rook takes g2 check. And now, okay, obviously king f1, queen f3 is horrible, mate next move. And king takes g2 is no better because queen f3 check followed by queen to g2 mate. But white can play king to h1. And so it still may not be clear yet whether this knight takes f3 check was a good idea or not. Okay, so what happens here? Queen takes f3 is, of course, a blunder, but maybe there's something else that can be played. So if you haven't worked this out yet, I would say definitely try to work it out now. Okay, well, let's look at rook to g1 check first. So if rook to g1 check, king takes g1. Of course, we still can't take the rook. Rook to g8 check. And now rook to g3 would be bad because we trade rooks and play queen to g2. But after bishop to g3, rook takes g3 check. Here, okay, rook takes g3 would allow a perpetual like this. And black has to play queen h1 because queen g3 allows queen e8 mate. Okay, but going back here, h takes g3 is just winning. All right, so this means that rook to g1 check is no good. But there are two other possible moves that are good here for black. Okay, so one, actually let me put a question mark here, with rook to g1. Okay, rook takes h2 is in fact quite nice. All right, if king to g1, this isn't going to help at the end of the day because of rook to h1 check. So we have this little trick, and then we're going to take on f3 with check next, and then play queen to g2 mate, if we haven't already mated with queen f3. So king h2 is pretty much forced. Rook h8 check. White has to again be very careful, has to make sure he steps off of all of the light squares. But now, with rook to h1 check, we win. So king h1, queen f3, king any, queen g2 mate. Okay, so there's one winning line. And then also, if you didn't calculate all the little tricks there, there's also simply rook to g7, which gives an x-ray defense to c7. And now queen takes f3 as a winning threat. So queen g7, queen f3, king g1, queen f4. And white's avoided mate for the moment, but he's down 2 pawns. His king is in terrible trouble, and he's undeveloped as well. So this is completely winning for black. So it's not quite as nice as the rook takes h2 check line, which mated by force with a couple of rook sacrifices, but this is perfectly adequate as well. Okay, so queen takes e7, knight e5, knight f3 is a real threat. White can, of course, avoid this with knight e2 or bishop g3, but black is still in good shape. Okay, if knight takes c4, Here, as you saw, because I went on, bishop to c5 is the best move. So now the knight on c4 is hanging, and after knight b to d2, d3, king h1, rook h8, queen e4, and now something like rook d to f8 gives black a clear advantage. White can't take on d5 because after ed, then both the knight on c4 and the rook on f4 are hanging. And, okay, white's a pawn up, but black's activity is just too much. So, for example, bishop g3, rook over. Again, queen d5 is impossible because after ed, the knight on c4 and the bishop on g3 are hanging. So queen f4, e5, knight e5, rook takes g3, takes. And although white is in decent shape materially, he has a rook and 2 pawns for 2 bishops. This isn't a position where that's really going to do him too many favors. So his pawns on the king side are almost locked in place because if he starts pushing them, his king is going to become an endangered species very quickly. So black's active minor pieces, the passed pawn on d3, and so on, give him a clear advantage here. Okay, so all of this goes back to this knight to d7 line. So we were just examining what happens on queen e7 castles, queen h7 castles. In the game, Keres chose queen to h5 check, and this is not a bad idea. Bronstein played rook to g6. Notice, of course, that knight takes g6 is impossible because of queen takes h5. So queen takes h7, knight takes e5, bishop takes e5. And this has all arisen more or less by force since knight to d7. And we might wonder at first what exactly was Bronstein's idea with knight to d7. So now white has managed to restore the material balance, and he's threatening the rook on g6. Black's king still hasn't castled. And, okay, even the pawn on c7 is hanging, not that it's all that important. But it looks at first sight like things really aren't so bad for white. But, in fact, it's not so good for white after all, as we'll see in a moment. So, again, what do you think black should play here? What looks like the best way for black to proceed? Well, the answer here is a nice tactical blow. Rook takes g2 check, king g2, and queen takes e5. And now white is even ahead in material, very slightly. He has the exchange for a pawn, but rook and knight versus 2 bishops, and in this case pawn, is often a very good material balance for the side with the bishops, even when the position is normal. But here the position is not normal at all. White's king is in big trouble. He's very undeveloped. And once again, black's massive pawns in the center is going to pose tremendous difficulties for white. So I think this position is frankly just about lost for white. In fact, I wouldn't say just about lost. I would say it simply is lost for white. Okay, Keres plays queen to g6 check, at least trying to slightly inconvenience black. King to d7, knight to d2. Okay, so white has finally just about finished his development, and he's threatening to take the pawn on c4. He might also want to play rook a to e1 followed by knight to e4. So, and also rook a to e1 is going to put pressure on the pawn on e6 as well. So it looks for a moment like white is getting a little smidgen of counterplay here. So what's the best move for black? And this, I think, is a very nice move. So I'll have a drink of water here and give those of you who aren't in the pausing mood a few more seconds to think. Well, the answer is the really elegant and paradoxical queen to h8, decentralizing. So normally you don't want to make such moves. If you have a piece as beautifully posted as the queen right in the middle of the board, you'd want to keep it there or maybe put it on d5. But the idea behind queen to h8 is a fairly obvious one once you've executed the move, and it turns out to be extremely strong. The idea, of course, is to play rook to g8, maybe also bishop to d6, when the pressure on the g and h files will become just overwhelming for white. Okay, king to h1 is played, getting out of the way of the threatened skewer. Rook to g8 anyway, of course. Queen to c2. And now here, maybe an inaccuracy from Bronstein. So the move he played was certainly good enough to maintain a winning advantage, but he had just an outright winner here, I think, with bishop to d6. So this looks like an even better move than what he chose. Okay, so two possibilities for white in defense of the h2 square. So one is knight to e4, and the other is rook to f2. So let's see. So knight e4, trying to plug up the diagonal as well, and now d3. Queen d2, bishop e4, fe4, queen to d4, attacking the e-pawn. And now if rook a to e1, rook h8 is crushing. So there's just no good defense to the threat of rook takes f2, h2, excuse me, because rook f2 is met by bishop to g3. All right, so going back here, if queen to f2, queen e4, queen f3, this actually allows white to perhaps break the attack. The downside is that the endgame that now results is completely hopeless for white. So the e-pawn and the d-pawn are going to run, and can maybe play bishop to e5, and maybe could even play at some point, if he really wants to be kind of a show-off and rub it in, can maybe even play bishop takes b2, when black will have four connected passed pawns, admittedly two of them are doubled, running down the board. So this is absolutely hopeless for white. Okay, so going back to bishop to d6, we just looked at knight to e4. If rook f2, then queen h4, rook a to f1, d3, kicking the queen off of the second rank for a reason we're about to see, queen d1. Okay, if queen takes c4, by the way, there's a nice little finishing blow here. So you guys get 5 seconds to solve this one. So you don't get to stop the recording here. You have to solve this one live. Okay, the answer is bishop f3, taking advantage of the fact that both the rook on f2 and the knight on d2 are overextended, that they're overloaded, I mean to say. So rook f3 allows queen takes h2 mate, while knight takes f3 allows queen takes c4. Okay, so after d3, queen to d1, but now rook h8. And if the queen were still on the second rank, white's queen, he can move the knight and keep the h2 pawn adequately protected. But here that's impossible, so black wins. Okay, so bishop to d6 is maybe a little bit more accurate, but the move in the game, queen h3, is perfectly fine as well. Okay, threatening, of course, queen g2 mate. So he plays rook f2. Bishop to d5, protecting the pawn. Knight e4. And this is maybe dubious, but ultimately he's lost anyway. So Bronstein plays bishop to h4. And, okay, what do we do now? The rook can't move sideways because it hangs the f3 pawn. If it retreats, well, we'll see that in the game. And what else is there? Knight to g3 is no good because bishop takes g3 and he can't recapture. So if rook a to f1, of course, we just take. And position like this is simply winning for black because he's up material. He's no longer even down material, and he's got the better game. So rook f to f1 is the only move that makes any sense, even though ultimately it's inadequate. d3, queen to d2, and here you have a final little puzzle in the game. So how does black finish off white's resistance? I mean, it looks, again, it's looking like, well, okay, his position is pretty miserable, and he can't really disentangle very easily, maybe not even at all, but it's also not obvious how black finishes the job here. So what does he do? Well, we have to put pressure in some way on one of these key squares. So g2, okay, we have nothing else to really add to the pressure there. f3, okay, so that makes rook to f8 a possibility. Or e4. And in fact, that's the place where Bronstein chose to hit with rook to g4. So this is just a killing shot, and white is unable to keep all three of these crucial squares adequately guarded. So, for instance, okay, well, rook a to e1 doesn't help because after bishop takes e1, the same dilemma arises for white, and he's just going to be out in exchange relative to where he was to start with. Okay, if f takes g4, yeah, this just loses. Bishop takes e4 check, king g1, and then queen takes g4 check with mate next move. So the bishops are just slicing away, and the result is checkmate on g2. So finally, there's the move played by Keres, rook to f2. But now black is able to simply regain his material and liquidate into a dead one ending. Bishop takes f2 check, queen f2, and now simplest is queen takes f3, which is what he played. Queen f3, bishop e4. And in this position, white resigned. He's down 2 pawns, he's losing more. He's also threatened by d2 and rook to e1. So this is just a completely hopeless position. And the conclusion of a really beautiful game played by Bronstein. So lots of lessons to be learned here. Both the specific opening lesson, of course, but also how to approach a situation where you see some kind of new move, or at least a move that's new to you, in a well-known position. So what should you do? Should you just look for something simple? Should you move quickly? No, of course, not at all. Take your time. Take an attitude that there must be something wrong with what my opponent is doing. Now, it may turn out that this will be the exception. Maybe your opponent really found some brilliant new idea. But if he did, well, then you might be dead anyway. So it doesn't really matter then. So take the attitude that there's something wrong with what your opponent is doing when you see a move that you don't know in a position that is a well-known position. All right, so assume there's something wrong with it. Take your time. Figure out as best as you possibly can what is wrong with it, and be confident. Okay, know that the refutation is most likely there, and if you work hard enough, you'll find it. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this game. Again, it's a little bit unusual for our typical fare in these presentations, but again, hopefully it's one that you found worthwhile. So thank you very much, and I'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.